Thank you so much for being here. It is my pleasure to introduce Eyre to you guys today. Pete and I kind of go way back by this stage, which is one of those great things that happens within our community. You know, people come, they have ideas about stuff. You know, people will sometimes say the Free State Project is centralized, but I really do believe it is, for the most part, decentralized. There's nothing more pleasurable for me to see when people bring their brain power and their enthusiasm and their abilities to something and start things that actually change the world. And I truly do believe that Copblocking and the way they've set this up is one of those things. I can speak from personal experience. I got arrested for wiretapping several years ago, and I'm currently suing the Eyre Police Department. And the night it happened, in the back of my head the whole time I was like, what would Pete be doing right now? and probably would have done a better job than I did, but you know, I was young and innocent at the time. So I originally met Pete, I think, online, even before we met in person, when he was still at the think tank in Washington. And then he was involved with Bureaucrash for several years, I would say, and I blogged there a few times, sort of in between all the other things I'm doing. And I just personally have a deep-seated respect for you, because I think I've watched your approach evolve. I love, he called me out at PorkFest last year because I did a little, you know, cops are thugs and blah, blah, blah. And he was like, you know, you really shouldn't collectivize. And it really stuck with me, because he was like, the way to think about, you know, the police force and stuff is in the same way that we think about everything else, i.e. individualism, and thinking about that person as a person and thinking about how can I reach this person and maybe change their mind. And I think Copblocking is doing that, and I certainly think Pete is doing that, and it's my great pleasure to introduce him.
Cool. Thanks, Carla. Mutual respect, for sure, and appreciate all y'all being here, your time. I know there's a lot of competing events right now, and you know, not just that, but a lot of competing things going on in your life and elsewhere in the world. So thanks for coming to Liberty Forum and connecting with a lot of other good people. I hope you leave not just this, but this weekend with some more thought-provoking ideas that you can incorporate into your life, and we can help advance this voluntary society. But real quick, what I plan to do today, I'm not really some polished speaker per se. I just like to share ideas, and so this is going to be first part sort of practical tactics on how to safeguard your rights, and then get more into the ideas and how I think, you know, if you're here, then I think I would hope that you think police accountability is a good thing. So how to make that happen, how to maximize that, and how to eventually get away from even the need to have a site like copblock.org exist. So real briefly, I'll just touch on copblock.org. It was founded a few years ago. A good friend of mine, who many of y'all know, Adamo Freeman, he was having some issues with some of the folks in his small town in southeast Wisconsin who were harassing him, one individual in particular, and he wasn't finding any recourse through the official channels. So he recognized, as I think many of us do today, that transparency is a good thing. It ousts the bullies. So he started blogging about that online, and soon after myself and a number of other folks started collaborating with him there, and Copblock has since grown to be a decentralized project united by a diverse group of individuals who advocate for police accountability and individual rights and dissemination of tactics, effective tactics to use while filming police. Thus far, Copblock now, it's grown quite a bit. It has over 100,000 unique views a month on the .org, and we have, you know, millions of views on the YouTube and stuff, and there's dozens and dozens of offshoots being founded, and that to me is a good sign. So I know if we're here and we care about liberty, it's easy to step back sometimes and you know, point to things that might get us frustrated, or things that we think might strip us of our rights. But if in the scheme of things, I do think things are moving in the right direction. So I just want to encourage y'all to, I guess, not be pessimistic, but be optimistic. So real briefly, some practical tactics on how to safeguard your rights. I think many of us here, some of this might be not new information, but hopefully you will learn a few things that you can incorporate. Since I am going to cover some ground quickly, if you do want to reference some of this information, we have a page at Copblock Know Your Rights, so copblock.org/knowyourrights. A lot of this information I'm going to cover in the next couple minutes can be found on that document. It's not too lengthy, but I think it's pretty informative. And if you have any suggestions on how it can be improved or other info that we can incorporate, please do let us know. You know, we could all learn from each other, and that's what this is all about. So real briefly, again, you know, if you're approached by a police employee, and I guess first we should say, why is this important? And generally, you know, I would think most folks that are here at Liberty Forum tend to be peaceful people, non-aggressive people. They respect property rights, and today, sometimes folks with badges get away with violating you or your property, and so it behooves us to speak out against that, to both safeguard our rights and to deter it from happening to ourselves or others in the future. So first off, I'd say, you know, one thing you could respond with if you are approached by a police employee. Say you're walking on the street, you know, you could say, am I being detained? And if you're not, you could just keep walking on your way. Or sometimes if you ask, am I being detained, am I free to go, the police employee may just continue to pepper you with questions. And it may be a little different of an interaction from a conversation, you know, with somebody who doesn't have that costume on, you know, to just keep saying the same response back. Am I being detained? Am I being detained? But eventually, you know, they're going to find there's no purchase to their questions, and then they're going to respond. And if they say no, then you're free to leave. And you know, that's definitely a way to get out of a situation that could have some negative effects. Otherwise, if they say yes, you are being detained, then you could remain silent. And again, these aren't groundbreaking ideas, but they are things, if they were spread more widely, if everybody knew of them, would help I think lessen, or it would help increase transparency and everything. So also never consent to searches, whether that's of your person or your property, of your house, anything like that. A lot of times, if you know, some people might say, if you have nothing wrong, if you've done nothing wrong, you have nothing to hide, why don't you just go ahead and do it? And because if that's true, I mean, you think about it, if all of us are walking around Nashua tonight and we independently are approached by police employees and ask, hey, let me search your person, or you don't have anything on you that you shouldn't, do you? Can I search you? And if we all said, sure, go ahead, you know, I just want to get out of here, then that's not going to deter it from happening in the future. But if we all say, no, you don't have my right to, you know, not at all, and that will disincentivize them from approaching us or other folks in the future. And you know, it'll think about it from the perspective, if a stranger came up to you, would you allow a stranger to go through your property? Probably not. You know, so why would you let this person with a badge go through your property, especially when you know that they operate according to claimed double standards? It can't end well. And even if you deny them the right to the ability to search you, they might come back with, well, this is going to be harder for you. I'm going to go get a dog and I'm going to do this or that. But even so, I would say that time is a lot of times it's a bluff. And even if they do get a dog, I mean, the fact that they might call an animal to supposedly trigger to be able to search your person or whatever, I mean, that just shows that the whole system is sort of flawed, because, you know, how can an animal supposedly trigger, you know, lessen your rights to keep your property and yourself safe from a search? I mean, that alone is pretty ridiculous. But so am I being detained? Don't consent to searches. Don't self-incriminate. A lot of times police ask probing questions to try to solicit information from you, or even about a friend or a colleague. You know, where are you at? Where are you going? What are you up to? What do you have in here? Kind of stuff. Just don't even. It may seem trivial conversation, but a lot of times police employees are trained to sort of pull that from you. So I would advocate, especially initially if you start having police interactions, just not to even engage in these conversations. And always I'd suggest you remain calm, cool, and collected. You know, a lot of times it could be a nervous situation. It's one you don't want to be in. But if you're calm, cool, and collected, you're much more likely to respond, obviously with a level head. And even take some time, pause between. If you're asked a question, don't just try to like right away answer them and be on the defensive. Take a few seconds and think about what's going on, and then, you know, just remain calm, cool, and collected, especially if you're documenting the interaction. This will help leverage the event. If it's you and a police employee on the street and you remain calm, cool, and collected, and something does happen, if you're kidnapped and caged for no reason, then it's going to be pretty clear to people who see that video who's in the wrong. They're not going to be able to say, well, that dude was aggressive, or that dude deserved it, or he spoke back, or anything like that. Just be calm, cool, and collected. But that doesn't mean be a pushover. That means standing up for your rights. and outlining what's going on. So if you are approached, a couple things I would suggest essentially can be subsumed in 2 words: document and disseminate. So document the interaction. Always film the police interaction if you're able. Then there's an objective record, and if possible, if you have a smartphone, use a live streaming app. If you don't, does anybody in here have a smartphone without a streaming app right now? A few of us. Okay, so if you go to copblock.org/apps, APPS, there's a number of apps listed on there. I use Bamboozer myself. It's a free app. You can go online, create an account, download the app, and then it's on your phone. And then, I drive with my Bamboozer app loaded, or if I'm walking down the street, if I see something, I start recording. I try to give an overview of the situation, the time, date, location, the pertinent information, so if something does happen. The thing the live streaming apps do is they store the content off-site. So if you yourself are kidnapped and caged, or your device is taken as evidence and it can be lost or footage deleted, the fact that the live streaming app saves a copy of it off-site really protects you. And I've seen it many times help people, get out of situations that they were in where the scenario would have likely ended in another fashion, because that objective record is out there. It doesn't hinge then on people trying to track you down, figure out what happened to you, find out you're in a cage, and then try to figure out details and try to get them out. Instead, they can just see the subjective record and they can know for themselves what unfolded. They don't have to, it doesn't even have to be a trust thing. If I know Garrett, if I didn't even know Garrett, but I saw a video of him walking down the street, being kidnapped and caged for no reason, I could see what unfolded. I don't have to say, do I trust this guy, what he's written down about what happened? No, I can just see it for myself and know, hey, that was messed up, and come to his aid. So create document the interaction, ideally with video, and if not, at least with, right after the incident happens while it's still fresh in your mind. So you always want to get the name and badge numbers of the people you interact with. So that's very important, and we'll go into that in a little bit, why that is. So when you create the objective record, I suggest people have busy lives. They don't, it might be a very significant impact for you the first time you've ever been kidnapped and caged or something like that, or a massive miscarriage of justice in your own life. But everybody else is busy, and so you want to make it as easy as you can for them to get up to speed. So I'd suggest, even if you make a video, definitely do an overview post, and just make a quick summation at the top, maybe a paragraph or two of what happened, just to break it down, and then a longer overview so they can quickly get up to speed, and then figure out the details if they have that interest to find out. But that'll make it easy for people to figure out what the situation is, and then also include the contact information for the individuals, the agencies that were involved, so that they can follow up. If they learn of, for example, a situation and all it is your write-up or your recount of it, they might say, oh, that's pretty unfortunate, he got wronged. But if they learn of it and there's easy to act on next step there, call these folks, let them know your thoughts. It can be a real game changer. And I myself, and I know a number of other folks in this room, have had threats levied against them, what are called charges, because of the amount of support that comes. And that's one thing Copblock definitely advocates, is being transparent. Instead of, if you're wronged, don't just expect to get justice in the court system, what I call legal land, because that's arbitrary, and the rules that they purport to act according to change according to their whims. They're vaguely worded so they can side with their own actors and things like that. So I would definitely encourage you, if you do find yourself in a situation where you have some threats levied against you in legal land, work between the arrest date and that court proceeding to get the word out and to try to shape the conversation. Because if you can win in the court of public opinion, if you can get the word out there and get people to weigh in on your side, then it can have a significant impact and really change how it goes forward in legal land. And especially, you could have your threats dismissed even before you get there. So that's documentation, the dissemination, sharing the objective record. At copblock.org, there's a submit tab. You can share your recount or your story there. The site, like I said, gets over 100,000 views a month now, and it could get picked up by allied outlets and some other media to help leverage that incident, because it's already a sunk cost. If you've written it once, then you may as well just try to get it out there. And then also, Also, you want to provide some updates if you can, and then if this is a big incident that happens, provide overarching posts or videos from time to time, because you can't expect, if you get, say you get arrested in January, then you have a court date in February, then another one in March, then you have a jury trial. Like, you can't expect everyone to stay up on everything that's going on, but if you create an overarching post that says, hey, this happened, and then these things in legal land happened, and now here's where we're at, here's how you can help me, that one place people can go to find stuff, that'll make it more likely to happen. But like I said, try to get the names and badge numbers. That's important because, especially with Copblock, we try to advocate that you don't just blanketly apply blame to say, like when Dave Ridley was kidnapped and caged in Nashua at the Biden, outside the hotel last year, you know, it's not as effective to just say the Nashua PD arrested Dave Ridley, but you know, this individual and this individual acted in the wrong. So we can focus attention on those folks. You know, we can do call floods to them if it's a big enough incident. You know, we can try to solicit the information for those folks, and if it's not there, you know, we could put it out and say, hey, anybody have access to this information? And someone might step forward who has more information about the people. Someone might be able to glean that information through, you know, electronic means and things like that. But so that really boils down to the point of striking the root and focusing on the individual responsible, because it's not a police. If you look at a situation as the Nashua PD beat me up, I mean, really, was there, I don't know how many folks, like 100 folks? Did 100 people wearing badges beat you up? It was likely, you know, one to a handful of people who beat you up, and they should be the people that are called out and held responsible for their actions. It's not, and similarly, you know, if you're kidnapped and caged, instead to be, you know, any of these catch-alls, interfering with government administration, resisting, disorderly, anything like that, you know, really just don't go into defensive mode per se to say that, you know, well, I didn't do this and here's why, but go into offensive mode and say, you know, I was a peaceful person, this guy acted in the wrong, here's what he did to me, and really just like distill it down, and don't let yourself get caught up in the language, the legal land language that's used. And another way you can sort of focus on the individual responsible, in Keene last year, as some of y'all may have seen, our buddy Derek J. Freeman was sort of knocked off his bike and punched by a guy named Fenton Moore, who happened to wear a Keene police badge, and a lot of us didn't think that, we thought Fenton Moore was acting in the wrong. So, you know, later that evening, a number of us, while other people were editing video about the incident, a number of us went outside his property, sang a song that was pretty positive, and then a couple of us went door to door to his neighbors' houses and said, hey, I know if I lived next to some guy who was aggressive, I'd want to know about it, and today your neighbor did this to our friend, I thought it was wrong, and here's a link to a video, you know, check it out for yourself. And that was a very targeted way that I thought was very effective. It's a peaceful means to help hold people accountable that are in the wrong. So those are things I suggest. I know, again, we cover a lot of ground, so copblock.org/knowyourrights has a lot of this info. And that's good. It's good to do this damage control. It's good to support each other. That's the idea behind Copblock, is that, you know, there's more good people in the world than bad folks. And if we can oust the bullies, if we can shine a spotlight, the disinfectant light of transparency on their actions, then we can support each other with this. So that's good. But even better would be for these instances not to happen. And so how do we make that happen? You know, that's really my end goal. I don't want to be out cop blocking the rest of my life. You know, I'd rather live in a peaceful community. So I'll put forth the idea that, you know, it can never happen when there's a coercive monopoly, which is what police are today. They say everyone who lives in this area, we have the sole monopoly on protection of you, and therefore we have the right to steal your money to protect you. So from the start, there's a double standard on which this institution of protection supposedly exists on. The fact that they claim the right to steal money from you to then protect you, you know, it's a racket. And there's having that coercive monopoly, it means there's an oversupply of policing in terms of the number of employees, in terms of the actions that are said to be illegal, that don't have any victims, that don't harm person or property. There's a lack of transparency, a lack of accountability, and a lack of efficiency. So these are all things that exist today because that there's a claim monopoly for this good or service, safety or protection. And obviously it's a good or service that's in demand. We all want to be safe and secure. So the question is, if this is a desirable goal, then there's probably a better means to get there. And that's usually the line that I use when I have conversations with police employees. Like, I'm not necessarily, this isn't an anti-cop message. It's a lot of folks that go into policing do so with good intentions. It's just saying, hey, perhaps there's a better mechanism to bring this about. And a lot of times police employees will, readily admit that they work with some colleagues that are heavy-handed or that they know are corrupt. So if you can paint the picture for these police employees and say, wouldn't you prefer to work in an environment where that wasn't the case? If they're a good police employee, then that's more often than not their preference. And in a structure that is not a coercive monopoly, there would be more accountability. And if I had a protection company, I would not knowingly hire someone who was aggressive, because it could potentially bankrupt me and I could be held accountable. So you want to, I guess, as much as you can, I guess, try to just keep that kind of stuff in mind. And even to the point where these coercive monopolies, like if you ran a business, you'd probably want to hire the person with the most skills or the most aptitude or whatever. But there's been instances, this guy named Robert Jordan who applied for New London Police Department. This was a decade ago, but he was rejected, and the reason why he was rejected is they said his IQ was too high. So he sued for discrimination, and they said that he was ruled against, and then it went to the Second U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, and the reason that they still ruled against him was they said since he scored too high, he could get bored with police work and might soon leave after undergoing costly training. So it's like, wouldn't you think if you, yeah, right? Wouldn't you think if you ran a business, you'd want the best person? And so they want, my thought is that they want folks that will be more conformist or obedient or whatever, so they didn't want to bring them on board. There's a statement I heard when I was on the road. I just did this month-long cop block tour, went to a couple dozen cities, and a guy I met, he said, when accountability doesn't match responsibility, there's an issue. And today that's what we have. The police employees are thought to have all this authority to be able to enforce the laws and things, but at the same time they're never held responsible for their actions because of this claimed double standard. So they have these legal fictions created, such as sovereign immunity, which say, I was acting, under color of law, so I'm not held accountable for my actions. So the fact that an individual can act and then claim to not be accountable for their actions really leads to some bad things. And I know these aren't maybe revolutionary ideas I'm sharing. I just want to make clear a case to unpack the mysticism that surrounds the policing structure as it is today, to really then hopefully make a more compelling case for a society without a coercive monopoly for this institution. Another instance that comes to my mind, I lived in Minnesota when I was a teenager, and one instance that happened, this was back in 2008. There was a guy who was at home with his family and 6 children, middle of the night. Here's his door get kicked in, and a bunch of people rush in. He's scared. He's got 6 kids, 3 to 15 years old. He's got his gun, and so he's like, he's looking down the stairway. He sees some people come in. There's an exchange of gunfire. And then the folks who broke in identify themselves. Turns out they were wearing Minneapolis PD badges, and no one was shot in this exchange. And the chief of police down there later apologized, and then they later said they raided the wrong house, and then the folks who broke into the house were later given awards. So I mean, think about the perverse incentives that allows for. And the person's the man's wife who lived in the house, Yi Mao, she said, my family's a mess. My son, who saw the shooting, has nightmares and needed therapy. They've ruined a life. I don't understand why they get rewarded for that. So these are the kind of disincentives that exist in this monopoly today. And to even go back to them saying we've raided the wrong house, oftentimes you hear that. They raid the wrong house, they shoot a dog, they raid the wrong house and shoot somebody who thought they were getting burglarized. And so, but what would be the right house? Oftentimes these raids are used for people who might possess a substance other people say is illicit. But the real question is that hurting anybody? And it's not just the mere possession of a substance. So the fact that they might write it off and say, sorry, we raided the wrong house. I mean, even if you're raiding the right house, that to me is still a flawed idea, because that use of force to go into somebody's house is oftentimes aggression. You know, it's violating someone's property rights. It's violating their right. You know, they own their self-ownership rights to put whatever they want in their body as long as they're not hurting somebody else. You know, so that's something I'd encourage you to think about. You know, when you see, oh, they accidentally raided the wrong house. I mean, there's no incentive not to raid the wrong house because, you know, what happens? They get sued, then they get people who were wrong get money if they're successful from taxpayers, from other people in the area, so it really doesn't hurt the individual who acted in the wrong. Another thing to keep in mind, so we touched on the sovereign immunity. That's, you know, a pretty ridiculous idea. To me, it's just like this legal land fiction. Another idea is this no duty to protect the individual. So is that new? Is this new for some of y'all? Like that police have no duty to protect the individual? Most of you know about that?
Castle Rock versus Gonzalez.
Yeah, Castle Rock versus Gonzalez. Another one that I'm familiar with. There's a couple I was touching on real briefly. One's Warren versus D.C. and this was two women were living. They had a few ladies who lived in a house in D.C. Two women were upstairs. They heard their third roommate downstairs being assaulted, crying for help, and by multiple intruders. They called the police, not once but multiple times. They were told that police were on their way. A short time later, they heard their roommate scream stop. They assumed the police had got there. They went downstairs and found out that you know, the police hadn't shown up. In fact, that the intruders were still there. And for the next 14 hours, they were raped and brutalized and forced to commit sexual acts on each other, all these other things. And the ladies then sued, saying, "Hey, you guys said you were showing up," and da da da. And the court personnel said that they owed no duty to the victims and aren't liable for failure to provide adequate police protection because they have a duty to, you know, the general public, not an individual. So if you think about the perverse incentives that this allows for, I know if I went to, say, like a screen printer and I said, "Hey, here's $1,000 for a big batch of shirts," and they didn't deliver it, I'd be like, "Hey, we have an issue. You know, we made a contract." But today, police, they say, "Everyone who lives in this area, we're going to steal your money to protect you, but we really don't have an obligation to protect you." So there's no way this system is ever going to be bring about its desired, its stated ends, which are, and its well intended, its goals, which I agree are worthwhile, protection and safety. There's no way that an institution based at its core on theft can ever bring that about because it's flawed from the foundation. Another instance I want to mention about this no duty to protect happened last year. Some of y'all may have been familiar with it. Got this guy named Maxim Gelman. He was kind of scorned by his lover. She didn't want to continue associating with him, so he ended up getting into an argument with his own mom's partner, killing him, going to the girl's house, killing her mom, waiting for her, killing her when she fled in a vehicle, carjacked another guy, stabbed him. Then this was a 28-hour-long ordeal. He was on the New York Metro, and he was trying to bang and get into the conductor's booth, and a ticket salesman from the Lincoln Center there, this guy named Joe Lozado, saw what was going on, and he tried to intervene a little bit. He got attacked. He got stabbed 7 times by this guy in his efforts to sort of bring him under control. Eventually, he was successful. And then what happens? Out of the train conductor's booth come 2 New York police employees. You know, and so Joe Lozado he said, you know, when it was explained to me they chose to stay in the motorroom compartment instead of coming out, I was very upset. You know, you would think, hey, these guys take a salary to protect us, but instead they looked after themselves instead of the well-beings of these other people who you know, if you contract with somebody, you think you'd have an obligation for them to act on that. So anyway, Lozado sued, but the courts had said thus far that the police had no special duty to protect him or any individual on the train because the cops put the public safety of all ahead of one's individual rights. So, I mean, it's pretty ridiculous. But so again, we gotta get back. I mean, we could if you look at Copblocking, any number of these other sites, unfortunately there's not a lack of anecdotal examples about how police employees don't really provide this stated good of protection as they purport to. But I would, you know, like Carla touched on, it shouldn't be an us versus them. We shouldn't you know, if some people get involved with cop block, they might, they might say fuck the police or all cops are bastards. But I say, hey, I can understand why you might have that mindset, but that's not going to bring about a desirable conclusion. That's only going to exacerbate this us versus them or perpetuate this gulf or these barriers that supposedly exist. So I would encourage us instead to think about, you know, a lot of these folks who go into policing, they do so with good intentions. You know, they might have, since they were a kid, said, I want to be a cop, and everyone's like, oh, that's good for you, Johnny, or maybe their dad or whoever was a cop. So they might go into it with good intentions, but, and only then, when they get into the environment, realize sort of the perverse incentives, again, in this institution. So I would encourage you, if you do have interaction with the police, and it's not obviously a hostile one that you're on the spot right then, but to just try to share ideas with them and outline this situation to them. And you know, we've made a Welcome Leo's page on Copblock a couple months ago, and it's something that I often point police employees to check out because I think there's a good bit of resources on there. But the other thing, I guess, with the police employees, like the mindset going into this, it might be a well-intentioned thing. They want to help people in their community, and you know, but in the same time, you hear a lot of folks whose knee-jerk reaction to always trust the cops. You know, this thin blue line. You know, they might say stuff like they put their lives on the line, they have such a tough job, and the police themselves might think, you know, we're all that stands between chaos and civilization or something. But you got to think, like, why might their job be tough? And is it because a lot of the time is spent going around harassing people and issuing people ransom notes or putting people in cages for acting in ways for that person doing things that don't harm anybody? I mean, I know if I was going about my life and I wasn't hurting anybody and someone came along and demanded money from me or said they had the right to put me in a cage, I wouldn't be down with that. So a lot of the people that have this sort of anti-police, you know, mentality, you know, it could be, I would say, not justified, but I can see where they're coming from. But it's not going to help. It's not going to help lessen that situation or shrink it by perpetuating this us versus them. Instead, I think we have to try to share ideas, because at the end of the day, ideas have consequences. And you know, as we see from the Free State Project and sort of the larger liberty everything that's going on, I think we live in a very pivotal time, and ideas are like, you know, viruses, and if we can successfully share ideas with people, we can really bring about a more favorable reality. And again, the main drive for police right now is to protect the institution. That's the thin blue line. It's not to bring about justice or accountability. It's to protect the institution. So, you know, they investigate themselves, and they're backed up by the court process. So, you know, a lot of times, the way I look at it, and one thing I think is important is for us individually, and also try to communicate to others the importance of language, and to you know, not conflate legislation that somebody in Concord or in D.C. writes to be law. That's legislation. That's man-made and it's arbitrary. And I would say law is things that, you know, we know in our conscience, or if you point to natural law or God's law or customary law, to be emergent from the bottom up. Whereas, you know, so if you find yourself in a situation where the legislation and the law conflicts, I would hope you would side with the law. I would hope you would side with what you know is right. If someone today comes in and says, hey, anybody who's advocating freedom is going to be shot in this pit, I hope that, you know, like, I mean, that's a fear-based tactic. I hope that we would all then be even more encouraged to stand up and speak out against and act according to what we know is right. And so a lot of times police employees, they go after folks who threaten their claimed legitimacy, who don't obey the legislation, more than they go after people who violate law. You know, they don't, sure, I mean, it looks bad if there's a lot of violence in their town or whatever, but they're just going to say, we need more resources, give us more money, we need more, you know, tools to combat this. But if you disobey, I mean, that's where they really take an issue. You know, we see a lot of our friends who've been threatened with years in cages, or who are in cages today, for questioning this, what I call the status quo. If you don't obey, then they want to make an example out of you, because, you know, they only have the ability to do what they do because people are, I wouldn't say complacent, but they're unthinkingly, tacitly giving them authority. And a lot of this isn't to knock, you know, non-police employees. It's to recognize the fact that these ideas that a lot of us might talk about haven't been introduced to more folks, and most of the ideas that a lot of people operate by are learned from, you know, government schools, which I call gun-run schools, because again, it's an institution based on force. So they're learned all these ideas, and the whole paradigm is taught through government schools or through the mainstream media. So the idea of even self-ownership and the right to defend one's property, which includes yourself, might be kind of foreign to some people. So there obviously is a lot of incentive for the police employee, for the status quo, to perpetuate and peddle these ideas that allow them to subsist and to try to take more right, to grow and expand, essentially. If there's Austrian economists in here, that's kind of one of the takeaways from the public choice school of you know, when there's a lack of competition in police, in any, you know, good or service, but we're talking about policing, then the incentive for the police department isn't to, you know, actually be accountable to people or to provide justice. Instead, it's to grow their size and scope of influence, so to hire more police employees, to say more actions that are legal today are illegal tomorrow, and things like that. So today, you know, there's that saying, when freedom is outlawed, only outlaws would be free. Like, it shouldn't matter what these strangers put on a piece of paper, as long as you're acting aligned with your conscience, you know, then that's a much better reality. So I guess what I'm advocating is, instead of like a law coming from a centralized monopoly from the top down, I definitely think it is emergent, and it comes from the bottom up. And instead of having, you know, I would, like, for example, would those of us in this room, would we agree that like Abel has a sole monopoly on the right to use a legitimate right to use force? Because if we let Abel do that, like, he's going to be able to, you know, just do it more and more and more, and until, you know, we have no ability to
definitely become a maniac.
Right.
Homicidal. Yeah.
Right, but instead, if we said, hey, we all have the same rights, it's 100% freedom coupled with 100% responsibility, you know. So if you do something wrong, you make right, or else, you know, there's consequences. Then that's, I think, a much better scenario. So if we can agree to do that in this sort of setting, in our own spheres and our own lives, then it should definitely be able to scale up, and it, you know, across our communities. It shouldn't be a, you know, allowing for some people to have a legitimate right to use force leads to the gravest genocides that we see in the world throughout history. And so I just encourage us to look for that kind of stuff. I was going to show you all a couple of short videos that kind of underscored these points, but I have them on this Mac, and I didn't have an adapter. So there's a quote here by Bob Lafargue, who was the founder of the Freedom School out in Colorado back in the day, and you know, he says, "Government is a disease masquerading as its own cure," and that's what we see, you know, with policing. So. There's another article I wanted to point to. Again, this is like police today. They are based in the state in general. The reason for me, I'm most interested in like self-ownership and the non-aggression principle. And the reason I'm active with Copblock is because I think it's a very timely issue, and I view police as sort of the teeth of the state. And the state is just a bad idea. It's the idea that some external person has authority, you know, based on their title or based on their place of employment. So that, you know, subsists by peddling this fear, and people are a lot of folks allow for these things. So this one article that Police Mag recently ran, and I'm not a sovereign citizen. I do agree with some of their end goals in that you own yourself, but I don't necessarily agree with the means, because, you know, they try to like navigate this paperwork system and prove by government documents that they're free, but teach their own. But Police Mag ran this article about sovereign citizens, you know, saying sovereigns, and this is just an excerpt, sovereigns often video record interactions with law enforcement in hopes of intimidating officers to not enforce the law. Some of these are live streamed, and then it says they don't believe in legitimacy of government or validity of laws. This is completely different than the typical criminal. And then they said, or they do things that the average American citizen has accepted as a proper role of government. So, you know, they're trying to use fear and saying, hey, they don't recognize your authority, so they're, you know, in the wrong. And again, this is claimed authority. You don't have to grant these clowns any authority. And you know, and again, I said language is important before, so I hear some folks even here at Liberty Forum, you know, using words like citizen. What does a citizen imply? Like you're subservient to somebody else, that there's a government over you, that you are obliged to follow their dictates? I would encourage you instead just to recognize, again, that you own yourself. And this, you know, and not to point to a piece of paper, you know, such as the Constitution or anything for your rights, because if you do that, then what does that mean? Somebody who's born in North Korea or Mexico doesn't have the same rights as you or I? Like, I don't think that's the case. And there's obviously a lot of historical evidence we can point to societies, areas that existed for a long while, that existed absent this coercive monopoly of protection. And I'm definitely not an expert as like some of these other folks who spend their lives delving into these things are, but I'll just mention a few real quick if you want to look more into it. There's, you know, Celtic Ireland from 7th to 17th century, Icelandic Commonwealth 10th to 13th century. There was a lot of trade going on in between, you know, like folks who people would think would have a lot of disagreements with, but they recognize the value of these trade and stuff like that. So, and from that, law, you know, real law, what I would say is real law emerged from the bottom up. They were based on like customs, and they were easy to understand for everybody, and a lot of the punishments for breach contracts dealt with ostracism. They dealt with reputation, and if you wronged somebody and didn't make right, a lot of people wouldn't do business with you. So to take that example down to like our communities today, like I know if Kate stole from me and she didn't make right, I might be like, Kate, you got to make right, and I worked to make it public until she did. And you know, if Evan like ran a grocery store, he might say, hey, Kate, I'm not going to sell you groceries because I know you did this. And then as we each, instead of having a one-size-fits-all sort of big brother looking and enforcing law, we all have eyes on each other. So it's essentially flattening that hierarchy down, and instead of looking to a coercive monopoly to try to do this. Other examples, more recent, include like homeowners associations. I know there's pros and cons, but since in the past half century have grown from like 500 in number to over 1/3 in number. And these are, you know, again, like voluntary contracts people step into. They agree to some norms and rules, and if they, you know, obviously if they don't want to, they can move away, they can vote with their feet. And it's much easier to do that on a smaller scale than to like say vote like with your feet over thousands of miles. And there's the American Arbitration Association that, you know, founded in 1926. Last year had almost over 90,000 cases settled. So these are dispute resolution nonprofits that adjudicate disputes outside of this top-down court system. And I should touch on the court system real quick, because what we have today in the U.S. is based sort of on, mostly, you know, on the English court system, how that developed, and that used to be there used to be competition between different court systems. If we had a disagreement, we could go, you know, to different arbitrators, different court systems. And at one time, if you know, if an employee of the Crown happened to be a witness to what happened, I could then ask them to come speak on my, you know, to share what they've seen or whatever, and then I would have to compensate them for their time. So it didn't take long for the Crown to see that you know, this could be a source of revenue. So first they started mandating that one of their agents had to be at every court proceeding, and then they said, hey, we could make, you know, we could just make more money if we had our own court system and we outlawed all the other ones. So when that was going on, they said if anybody else continues to go to these other courts, you know, you're going to be thrown in a cage for your life. And so that's essentially how the court system was adopted. It's just this centralized process. And to think that a person or a group of people have the knowledge to codify law is, you know, pretty ludicrous, I think. And if this sounds far-fetched, I mean, think about most of your interactions during the day, during your life. You know, 99.9% of your interactions are in a state of what could be called anarchy, because there is no contract signed with people. It's essentially, you know, a mutual interaction or just a neutral interaction, you know, and it's not something fearful. A criminal, like a common street criminal, might come up to you and say, give me your money. They know that's not right. They know they don't have a right to your money. They don't say, I'll meet you here next week and you better bring me the money, but yet that's what police employees and the you know, and do. They say, you owe us this money or else. And so this is again, just to demonstrate the perverse incentives. A few resources I'll point to real quick if y'all want to look more into this, and then I'll get into a couple other things. There's obviously there's Origins of Individuals, Anarchism that Rothbard wrote, Not So Wild Wild West by Hill and Anderson, Polycentric Legal Order by Randy Barnett, Anarchy in the Law is one of my favorite by Ed Stringham. It's a collection of essays. A lot of folks weighing in on this stuff. And then another real good thinker on this subject is Bruce Benson, who's the chair of the econ department down in University of Florida, Tallahassee. And he's got one of his books I like called The Enterprise of Law. Is really good. But one of the best examples of what I'm talking about in practice, because this isn't just theory, it's things that we can act on today, because ideas do have consequences, and if we can act on them ourselves, we'll empower other people in our spheres to act on them, and it's admittedly it's difficult to see the impact that we're having. You know, it's not a campaign. We don't have a date that we're saying, oh, we got to do this by this time, or yes, we got this bill passed. I'm talking about like from the bottom up and sharing ideas. So it's tough to measure the spread of them and the depth of their impact, but it definitely happens, and it's the surest way to bring about this peaceful evolution that I know about. I definitely don't want to engage in some violent conflict and things like that. So one of the an example that I could point to today of it's not definitely not a one-to-one 100% sort of agorist outfit, but it's a group in Detroit called the Threat Management Center. And then when I was just on the road doing the Copblocking tour, I was able to interview these folks. And so back in '93, this guy Dale Brown saw a female being sort of brutalized or treated wrongly by some police employees, and he said, you know, I really can't stand for this anymore. So he started. He set out first. He started with a dog and a rifle, and now he's grown this company where they have 500 corporate clients, and they do patrols in a number of upscale neighborhoods whose houses average from 7,000 to 10,000 square feet. So they have a lot of paying clients, and they provide a very high caliber service for these clients. And with those profits, they're able to then help people, like people who are in need of help, less well-off neighborhoods they patrol. They drastically reduce crime in those areas. They escort, let's say, women who are going to court over an abusive situation as volunteers. If somebody is being harassed by an ex, they'll send one of their volunteers to their house, and they'll stay at their house for a week. You know, they'll just sort of be based out of there. They have a rifle, and it's very, you know, truckers were getting hijacked. They would ride shotgun with truckers, you know, and deter them from being stolen from. And he's also at the same time, for him it comes down to psychology, and it's this message that he says, and I agree with, is ultimately based on love. It's not out of hate. And so he has trained police employees in the Detroit area for over a decade now, and he works with every week he has a course, and he invites police employees in, and he trains them on this psychological ways to approach a situation. And he says today police, their primary motivation oftentimes is to get home to their family. But if that's their primary motivation, then you know they're willing to put themselves before their job that they've taken, which is to protect other people. And so he pretty much just says, no, you need to look past that. If you swear to do a job, if you're taking a paycheck to do a job to protect someone, you need to protect that person. And so that doesn't mean go in guns blazing and say the last man standing. It means try to diffuse situations, try to de-escalate things, try to create. Try to proactively change this environment on the ground so that it never becomes violent. And so he's been very effective doing that. I would show you all a couple videos, but I'll have some polished stuff up in a couple weeks on the Threat Management Center at copblock.org that I hope you'll check out. That'll really, I hope, showcase what they're up to. I mean, now they have a 10,000 square foot training facility. They have Hummers. They're like they do patrols in Detroit. They have a ship now, a boat that they use in the harbor there, so it's pretty awesome. Another thing we can do personally to help change this climate is to not call 911. I mean, I know that might not be an absolute statement depending on a situation, but oftentimes if it's a situation where there's a lot of tension, oftentimes introducing to that situation somebody who has a legitimate right to initiate force who's not held accountable for their actions only makes things worse. And a couple things I'll point to briefly. There's a kid this past year, a 16-year-old kid. He was depressed. He was a kid named Andrew Messina, and he talked to his old man on the phone, and they called the police. His dad wasn't home at the time, and the kid went out to the front door essentially, and I guess he knocked on the window pane. The window pane broke. Kid ended up getting shot by a police sniper and killed. And his old man said they brought an army to take out a 16-year-old boy. An army of officers, an armored vehicle, riot cops, and a sniper was this all needed. He says that instead of the fire being put out, they brought gasoline. So that's just one example. Another example that a lot of us are probably familiar with is Kelly Thomas, who was killed out in Fullerton, California. He was what happened in that situation was the owner of Slide Bar told his employees, hey, I don't want any homeless people hanging around my outside, so if you see something, call the police. And this guy, Kelly Thomas, was outside at one time. He told one of the bouncers, hey, call the police, tell him he's breaking into cars. And the bouncer said, I'm not going to do that. So the bouncer was fired. The manager called in, said this guy was breaking into cars. All Kelly Thomas was doing was picking up like cigarette butts, to try to find those. And so the manager called the police, lied to them, said he was breaking into cars. Police showed up and later beat the hell out of Kelly Thomas, killed him. And so now the bouncer's suing the manager and whatnot. But anyway, introducing police to the situation usually aggravates the situation, and I would just encourage you, if you can, to try to diffuse situations yourself. And instead of looking to these folks, I mean, create real networks with your neighbors, and have a barbecue or a potluck, or invite them over, and really lessen the isolation that some of us might feel in our communities, and instead build these resilient bonds with each other. And if hey, I know I can turn to Bill next door if something's going down, he'll come over if he can to help me. I mean, that alone can help change your own paradigm in terms of alternatives that you have to diffuse situations. So again, language is important. I try not to use the word arrest, because I think that's a sugar-coated word and it distorts what's actually going on. It's someone being kidnapped and caged. And a lot of us some of us have been kidnapped and caged in here for not doing anything wrong. So I'd encourage you to not, and to read like the mainstream media. They'll say the authorities said this or whatever, and just to like gloss over, to not even think about what they're saying. The mainstream media doesn't question the so-claimed authorities, and they just parrot what they say. So if you echo that if you say, well, the authorities said this, I would just encourage you to really unpack that language for yourself in your own mind, the way you look at it, and then also in conversations with people in your sphere. And you're all good. So so in essence, I'd say, don't grant these people who claim your authority, don't grant it. Just and it's not I don't think you need to try to live as a reaction to somebody else. I would just say live your life and associate with people that you want to associate with. And if something does happen to you or somebody you care about, then help support them and help do damage control. Don't let this coercive monopoly consume you, but instead be productive and just do your thing, and don't be guided by fear. There's a real good video by this guy named, his YouTube channel, Storm Clouds Gathering, and it's called The Chain of Obedience. And it's just over 2 minutes long, but it's solid. He pretty much just says, there's this chain of command a lot of people point to as being like, oh, we need to take out this top dog, or we need to change the system. But he says, no, this system only exists because there's this chain of obedience, because each of us has bought into that and given them authority. And then, so instead of trying to tweak the levers of power within this system, we should just ignore it as much as we can and just do our own thing. And again, today we're living in a time when technology has really helped us, I think, bypass these traditional gatekeepers of information like decentralized media and the claimed authorities. It's really helped people who before were alone in their town, that were being subjected to harassment by the police employees and stuff like that, really help them see that they're not alone and that they can get support. And geographical boundaries have essentially been eliminated by the internet and prolific spread of technology, cell phones and stuff like that, video cameras. And ultimately, I don't know, has anybody in here read the book called The True Believer? Nobody. Oh, Ed?
Do you want to get your video show on that?
Well, we're almost out of time, but I'll put something up on copblock.org in the next couple of weeks that has a bunch of links and videos and stuff. But so, oh, it's all good, man. We're almost out of time. I appreciate it, Ed. But so anyway, this book, True Believer, this guy wrote it. He was a dock worker. He wrote it in 1951, and he essentially was talking about like mass movements of people. And he says it doesn't matter. You know, even though on its face there might be a lot of difference between, say, communism and Nazism or this or that, he says a lot of people just want to like belong to something else. And this isn't me saying that people are sheep necessarily. It's saying that they just, to me, haven't been exposed to this idea of self-ownership and with that self-government. And so I think if we do want to live in a world, you know, free of legitimate right to initiate force, free of these institutions that allow for this, then it behooves us to share these ideas with others as much as we can, because to echo Karl Wagner, who's one of my favorite writers, you know, it's one mind at a time, and as each of us gets exposed to ideas, if we find that they make sense and we modify our own to incorporate them, then we act accordingly. And other people see that and they're empowered by it. You know, it's the idea of so in the True Believer, the author says, you know, a lot of these folks look to somebody else to be the leader, and they're like charismatic, and this whole mass movement is based on like hatred of the other, and it turns into this fanaticism, and there's undefined goals like the war on terrorism and stuff. It allows for all these, you know, all these ridiculous claims to be made. Oh, we have the right to kill whoever, or we have the right to do this or that. Like, so I would encourage you, if you can, I think those sort of mass movements that are easily led by others that you know, operate based on these coercive monopolies would not be able to happen if everybody does act deliberately in knowing that they own themselves. And you know, Storm Cloud's Gathering, he's got a video you know, where he says, you know, if Napoleon were in New York City, in Manhattan, and he commanded somebody to go out and kill these people, everyone would laugh at him, like, who's this clown dressed up all crazy, you know? And that's essentially like what we should look at. These, you know, people, you know, like, who cares what these folks in these dome buildings are saying? Like, to as great extent as we can, just ignore them, and let's live our lives. Let's create the societies that we want to live in, and let's not perpetuate these violent institutions. So that could be you know, again, sharing ideas. If you do find yourself harassed, don't just automatically pay the ransom. But, you know, I recognize, you know, a lot of people in here have families and jobs. They can't afford to take a lot of time off of work and things. But even if you can push back a little bit and not take the first plea deal, or push back here, or even sit a weekend in the cage instead of paying the ransom, like, if that happened, you know, as it continues to happen, it's going to lessen the capacity for those folks to continue to try to claim the right to usurp other people's rights and to get away with it. So I'll admit, like, a society without an institution of legitimate violence isn't going to be utopia. There's still going to be some bad folks, but it's going to be, those bad folks will be dealt with much more quickly before their harm can be widespread. So again, if you're interested, Copblock, there's now groups, offshoots in 41 states, and then in Australia, Canada, New Zealand, UK, Holland. So it's growing. That to me is a good sign. You know, and again, at the end of the day, I would encourage you to act according to your conscience. They can, and I know this is like dramatic, but they can cage your body, but they can't cage your mind. And as long as we're today willing to stand on our principles, you know, it's easier for us to make a change today if we stand on our principles than it will be tomorrow, or for our kids to do so next generation. So I think it's important that we do speak out when we see wrongs, and we do hold people accountable. And I know we're almost out of time, so I'll just end with this quote, you know, which is by Herbert Spencer, this essay he wrote, The Right to Ignore the State. He wrote 125 years ago. So The Right to Ignore the State. This for me was a very impactful reading, because it showed me, hey, I don't need to work through this like centralized monopoly to try to change things. I can just withdraw my consent, and if we all do this, then it's a peaceful evolution. So he says, it is a mistake to assume that government must last forever. The institution marks a certain stage of civilization, is natural to a particular phase of human development. It is not essential but incidental. Feudalism, slavery, serfdom, all tyrannical institutions are merely the most vigorous kinds of rule springing out of and necessary to a bad state of man. The progress from these is in all cases the same: less government. and to me, I would say arbitrary external authority. I would say self-government is what we should strive for. So then he says, less government. Thus, as a civilization advances, does government decay. So that's what I look at. I looked at this bad idea of government as a parasite, just like, it's a massive market distortions, wealth destruction, and, we're seeing millions of other people in this arbitrary political boundary being caged for engaging in actions that don't hurt anybody. So I would, ideas have consequence. I know I'm repeating that, but it's definitely important, and we shouldn't be scared. We should know that if folks do us wrong, then I'll try to get your back as much as I can. There's a lot of good people that will as well. So don't be scared, and don't if you think it's important, then it's worth standing up for. And with that, I think we can achieve the tagline of the Free State Project, which is liberty in our lifetime. So. Yeah.